Hey guys, welcome to another video. In today's video, we're going to touch base on how to configure Windows 2000 group policy to secure a Windows 10 or Windows 11 machine. Now you're going to ask yourself, why would you ever need to do this? And the truth is that the majority of companies out there have upgraded to, thankfully, 2012 R2 or better operating systems as far as your data is concerned from a security perspective on the back end. However, a lot of manufacturing companies still run the older systems. And the reason why is because in manufacturing, the majority of the equipment, the hardware, is usually very expensive. And when you have very expensive tools required to do either metal cutting or some other form of manufacturing, generally you don't replace the Windows operating systems because they just don't support the same systems. A lot of these companies don't have upgrades or update paths to get you to the later operating systems for their manufacturing tools or enterprise-based hardware. And we're talking multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment. So in order to upgrade Windows from 2000 to 2019 server, even though we're talking 19 years, it could be a $10 million project to do so because of the requirement on the back end. Now that said, a lot of the systems that require these Windows 2000 systems at this point, they don't have internet access. They never had internet access, and they're really not a security issue because the only people that would ever have access to them are physically sitting in front of them. And most of them are in well-controlled, clean environments where you're just not going to have somebody off the street walk in and steal the data off of it. So now we know the purpose of this video. Let's go over what we're looking at. So some things to keep in mind, I check my demographics on the actual videos, and I see a lot of the guys that are watching these videos are under the age of 25. And I assume the reason why is just a curiosity to see how these older systems worked. So I figure for the sake of this video too, we'll touch base on the security of Windows 2000. So if we jump into the actual C drive of Windows 2000, now I've adjusted the view. So if we go to Tools and then Folder Options and View, we can see we're showing hidden files and folders. We're not hiding the extensions, and we're not hiding the protected operating system files. So you could see in the C drive, this is everything that exists. There's no additional files that exist out of the box on a Windows 2000 configuration that are visible anyway. You'll also see that this particular server only has 10 gigs of hard drive space. And of that, we're only using just under 3 gigs of actual space. And that's the whole operating system, including Active Directory, including GroupPolicy, including DHCP and DNS on this one server. So that's an entire OS installation, and we're only using under 3 gigs of drive space. Now keep in mind that it's probably closer to 2 gigs of drive space because I have a page file on the system as well, which is, it's got to be good for at least 1 gig. So something else you guys are probably realize or notice in here is that we don't have a Windows directory. It's because in Windows 2000 we had WinNT. There was no Windows directory in Windows 2000. It was specifically WinNT. You'll also notice we don't have a users folder, and that's because it's hidden under documents and settings. That's where your users exist. Now from a security perspective, you'll also notice that we don't have program files x86, but program files on this system is the x86 directory. There is no program files x86 because this is a 32-bit operating system. You'll also probably realize that since we have these differences on the operating system, at the time everything was like this, but now since we've progressed from this, the vast majority of viruses written are not going to infect this system. They're just not going to have the capability of writing themselves to the correct directories because the directories just simply don't exist. The way you access them does not exist the same as it does on a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 system. So the obscurity of this operating system in a lot of ways makes it more secure than if you were running like, a 2008 box, because at this point the differences in the operating system have really secured it. The viruses that exist for 2000 have existed for 20 years, so if you run a 20-year-old antivirus, the likelihood of you getting infected with new stuff is pretty unlikely. It's pretty slim. Not to mention the constraints with space. I mean, if you're going to install, for instance, like a ransomware piece of software, a full package like that, usually those packages, once they download all of their software, the Trojans and everything else, are bigger than the hard drive is on this system. So you would notice. You would notice immediately when it ran out of drive space. You would think, though, with the space limitation that this operating system would be fast to install. But again, since we're talking 32-bit operating system, and for the most part, the hardware that would run this stuff, we're talking 20-year-old hardware, it's slow. So if you have the ability to take a snapshot, back it up, or put it on a VM system, do that. You'd be much better off than continuing to run it on the actual hardware it was designed to run on. Okay, so now that we got past our history lesson here, let's take a look at what we have as far as our configuration with our Active Directory stuff. So if we go to Programs, Administrative Tools, and we look in this list, we're going to see the installed applications. So for instance, on this particular system, we have DHCP, DNS, WINS. We have Active Directories, ADDS services. We also have our GroupPolicy configuration installed. But if we look at this list, I want you to just take a look real quick and tell me if you could find GroupPolicy. And the guys that are in here that are my age or older, just, go easy on these young guys. They just don't know. All right there, guys. So now that I've given you some time to actually look at this list, I want you to add to the comments down below, specifically where GroupPolicy exists. And I'm asking this specifically for the guys that are 25 years of age and younger. Where is GroupPolicy in Windows 2000? I suspect to the older guys we'll get a giggle out of this a little later when we go and we review the comments and we see all the edits next to them after they actually take a look at the full video. Okay, so now that we've had a chuckle together, so GroupPolicy on this system is rudimentary. The configuration is really designed to both work with Windows as well as LDAP. This was a really good selling point of Windows 2000 when it was released, was the integration services that it allowed you to use for Identity Access Management, or IAM, which I know a lot of you guys probably think that's something that's relatively new with Azure, but it's not. There used to be third-party companies that would develop this integration services, but it wasn't really designed to be like cloud integration. It was designed to integrate Windows with Linux. So you could use Sun1 Directory, which was Sun Solaris's LDAP integration, and that would give you the ability to use single sign-on with your Linux boxes with authentication from your Windows 2000 systems. And this is going to be the same kind of configuration you would get with computer associate software. And the reason why I know that is because 20 years ago, I was part of the team that wrote the software to integrate the LDAP configuration between computer associates and Windows 2000. So that's really where I started this journey in Active Directory from, was my involvement in the LDAP integrations teams with Linux. So now that we're taking a look at the actual structure here, our configuration for our GroupPolicy is going to be under DomainController Security Policy and Domain Security Policy. And if we drill down into one of these things, we could see, again, the rudimentary configurations, the ancestry that takes place between our GroupPolicy configurations of today and our GroupPolicy configurations of Windows 2000. And if we look at the long list of things here, we'll realize it's really not that long. Now, in Windows 2000, this was a game changer because this gave us a centralized location to start controlling securities. But by today's standards, this is so far beyond as far as what would be required to lock down our Windows 10 and 11 systems. There's going to be the question as to, well, how are we going to add the ADML and the ADMX templates into Windows 2000? How do we get Windows 2000 to communicate with our Windows 10 and 11 systems to actually introduce the later versions of the policies, the later configuration? And that's where this gets interesting. So what I'm going to need you guys to do now is, now that you have your domain controller, your Windows 2000 DC configured for the sake of this, or if you're working on a live 2000 domain controller and you need to configure your GroupPolicy for your Windows 10 and 11 machines, I'm going to need you guys to build a Windows 10 system with the remote server administrative tools on it and add it to the domain with the SMB1 disabled, or rather SMB1 enabled on the Windows 10 or Windows 11 machine, specifically Windows 10. Windows 11 is a little funky with this. I would specifically recommend you use Windows 10 for this. So build a Windows 10 machine, get the Windows 10 machine completely up, install all the remote server administrative tools for Windows 10. I'll add the script to the description so you have the PowerShell script to actually install the tools. Add the machine to the domain, and we'll kick it up with a Windows 10 side on the configuration. Okay guys, welcome back. So Hopefully at this point you have your Windows 10 machine configured up and running and also added to the domain. And you're logged in as the domain admin on the Windows 10 machine. So this is where it's going to get interesting. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to change the directory, the location where we're going to apply the policies and configure the policies from. So the problem with Windows 2000 and its integration into Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1, Windows 10, and Windows 11, is that the directory structure changes in Windows 7, really Windows Vista. And Vista had the backwards compatibility. So Windows Vista was technically 2008, which came in 64-bit, 32-bit, and that was really the last 32, 64-bit split on the Windows Server side. Those servers gave you the ability to work with both the old school stuff and the new stuff, and that's really the transition period. Now, since that's the case, Windows 7 was Windows Server 2008 R2. Windows 8, 2012, 8.1, 2012 R2. Windows 10 is really 2019. 2016 is kind of the weird stepchild that is a combination of Windows 10, long-term support C, and not really the full Windows 10 that we see today. It's kind of a transition step. Server 2022 is obviously Windows 11. We'll get to that eventually, but for the time being, let's take a look at our Windows 10 machine. So we've installed the remote server administrative tools, and we have it added to the domain. So I mean, at this point, if we go into, our folder or file explorer here, and we go to properties, we should see that we're added to the domain, specifically ytd.local, and there we are. So we do have this particular desktop added to the domain on ytd.local. We are using SMB1 for our communication. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to go to Administrative Tools, and then we're going to go to Active Directory Users and Computers, and we're going to pin this to start. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pin DHCP to start. We're going to pin DNS to start. We're going to pin Group Policy Management to start. And that's all we really need for the sake of this configuration. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log into Active Directory Users and Computers. And we're going to go into ytd.local. And in here, we're going to see the same thing we would have seen on the other system, which is our testing, troubleshooting desktop, our ISA server, which if you don't know what that is, there's a previous video. Feel free to watch that. And then this is our ADMX controller. So this is our actual controller. And when we go into users, we can see our users groups. We can see the domain controller, which is the YTD DC001. And if we go to properties of this, we'll see that this is a Windows 2000 system. It's a Windows 2000 server. That's our domain controller. So now we know we have access into our domain controller, interactive directory users and computers, from our Windows 10 machine. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to open up Group Policy Management. And we're going to go to the YTD local, and we're going to see the domain. And we're going to see an error, because that's totally normal. And you should expect to see errors in this thing. And the reason why is because we're currently integrating directly into our configuration. So here we go. So this is our default domain controller policy, and this is our default domain policy, just like we saw in our Windows 2000 system prior. And if we go into our settings and we do show all, we could see our configuration based off of our Windows 2000 settings. But what we're going to do now is we're going to modify our Windows 2000 servers, ADMX and ADML templates with our Windows 10 system. And we're going to change the directory location for our sysvol to the Windows 10 system and basically make our Windows 10 system an extension of the 2000 domain controller in order to control our group policies from a Windows 2000 domain controller. In essence, this desktop that we built will turn in to our group policy management console for our Windows 2000 infrastructure. Okay, so just to touch base real quick on the previous error we saw, that's going to be normal. We don't have all the ADML and ADMX templates loaded into our Windows 10 machine that exists on the 2000 domain controller. And quite frankly, it's not necessary that we load them onto our Windows 10 machine. Since we're going to overwrite these policy configurations with later policy anyway, it makes absolutely no difference whether or not we do it, whether or not we get the error. So in other words, if we're missing some kind of computer configuration or user configuration from the Windows 2000 days or NT4 days on our Windows 10 11 machines, it really doesn't matter for the sake of what we're doing. We want to control the later machines. We want to build security into the later infrastructure. And in order to do that, we really don't need those older configurations. Okay, so where do we start? I think the best place we could start is by starting with Active Directory users and computers and right-clicking and creating a new OU. And calling that new OU something like Windows 10 or 11 or modern hardware or something to that effect. So let's just call it modern clients. So there we go, we got our modern clients. Now I'm going to go into computers. And I'm specifically going to move my Windows 10 2K machine, which is my client for testing, into my modern clients location. And it's going to bark, and that's fine. I'm just going to say don't show this again and hit yes. And now we see our Windows 10 on our 2000 network here. Now, that's not the same as this machine. This particular machine is called ADMX CTL control. So we know that this is going to be our domain controller control. Well, this is going to be our group policy controller for our domain controller. So since we know that, we're going to actually go again. We're going to do new. We're going to go organizational unit, and we're going to call this thing ADMX controller. And we're going to hit OK. And we're going to grab our computer, and we're going to drag and drop that thing into the ADMX controller. All right, so now we have our modern clients and our ADMX controller. We're going to leave our ADMX controller alone and not apply any policies to that. So if we go back to group policy and we do a refresh, we're going to get the error again. Again, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Our clients are here, modern clients, our ADMX controller. We're going to block the inheritance of our ADMX controller because we don't want that system to get any policies of any kind. We want to use that specifically as our controller, basically an extension of our domain controller. So we're going to go to modern clients, and we're going to expand that, and you'll notice that we don't have anything there. We're going to go group policy. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the Hardend UNC policy location. So we're going to right-click, and we're going to do new. And we're going to do Hardend UNC. And we're going to right-click on that. We're going to do group policy status. We're going to use user configuration is disabled. And we're going to right-click on it again and do edit. We're going to go policies, Windows settings, administrative templates, network, and then we're going to look for specifically network provider, Hardend UNC path, and we're going to do enable and show, and we're going to put the values in here that point directly to our new sysvol location for our policy definitions. Okay, so what does this mean? What this means is that we have to define our policy location. In Windows 2008 Server, with the transition of the operating systems between the old and the new versioning, we changed the location of where the policies are actually stored. Now, all Windows 10 and 11 machines have a location under the Windows directory called Policy Definitions, which is a cache of an updated version of ADMX and ADML templates that exist on all Windows 10 and Windows 11 machines. In the prior versions, the systems used to pull the policy definitions from your sysvol location under policies. There would be a hidden folder called policy definitions. Now, Windows 10 and 11 have baked-in configuration allowing the policy definitions folder to update the local policy definitions. But you have to use the UNC hardening to define the location as to where those policies exist in Windows 10 and 11. That's how you enable the backwards compatibility of communication and updating policy. Now, if this isn't configured on your Windows 2012 R2 domain controller and you have Windows 10 and 11 machines, then your Windows 10 and 11 machines don't get computer policy. This only is not necessary if you have the latest build version of Windows 2019 server or Windows 2022 server, and then it's defined by the operating system. If not, chances are you don't have computer policy that's working on any of your Windows 10 and 11 clients without this policy configuration. So what you have to do to get this to work is you have to go into your local system first, which is C Windows Policy Definitions, highlight all of these files and copy them. Then you're going to have to go to your domain controller. In this case, we're going to go whack ytd.local, sysvol, ytd.local, policies, create a folder called Policy Definitions with a capital P and a capital D, and paste in your policy definitions from your Windows 10 machine. Now this policy definition folder will become your central store for your ADMX and ADML templates, which all other Windows 10 and 11 machines will use to download the policy configuration for your group policy settings. You'll need to change this, update this, or reconfigure this every time there's a roll-up. So if CIS does a benchmark every 6 months and you want to roll up new policy and securities, then every 6 months you'll have to update this policy definition store inside your policies folder on your domain controller in order for the clients to get the updated policies. Now, keep in mind, in 2019-22 server, this does it on the fly. So as soon as you update the policies, it downloads directly to the Windows 10 and 11 machines. But in 2000, you have to reboot the domain controller and you'll have to reboot the clients in order for the clients to get the updated policies. It won't bark, it won't throw an error, it won't tell you anything. It just won't work. So that's something to keep in mind as you go through this process. Okay, so let's define these policies. The value is /netlogon and /sysvol. And then it's require mutual authentication and a require integrity. And what that means is that the desktop is going to authenticate to the domain controller to make sure the domain controller is who it is. This is also going to force the desktop to look in more than one place for your policy definitions. Now this doesn't matter in 2019's latest version, and it also doesn't matter in 22 server, but it does matter in the previous versions. As stated before, if you don't have this in here, you will not get computer policy. And the easiest way to tell this is if on your Windows 10 machine, if you go into your group policy configuration under command prompt and just do a dir to show the actual date. If the day for the GPTINI file is not today, then the system has not pulled information from the domain controller. If you make a computer control configuration change, in other words, like a computer policy change, and you go in there and you do a dir and the machine policy configuration on the actual folder location doesn't have the date of the change, then you're not downloading the latest policy configuration, which means that this does not exist in your domain setup and you're not getting computer controls or computer configurations on your clients. This is required anything past 1809 on Windows 10. So once you have this in there, we'll just click OK. We'll close out of all these configurations because we have all our configurations at this point checked. And we're going to add the Hardend UNC to the modern clients. So you'll see it down here, and you'll just right-click Modern Clients and link an existing GPO, and then just link the GPO. And what we'll do is we'll jump over to the other desktop now, and we'll take a look at the desktop that's added to the domain as just a desktop, and check to make sure we actually have the group policy applied. Now, it should work without any issues, and the errors that we see in here shouldn't make any difference because the Windows 10 machine also doesn't have the 2000 configuration. And anything that's not an ADMX or ADML file will still configure as a registry change. Because remember, group policy is just an extension of registry modification on Windows. Okay guys, so welcome to the desktop. What we're going to do first is we're actually going to go to File Explorer so I can make sure that I show you guys that this is indeed a different machine. So the machine name is Win10-2K, and we're on the YTD domain. And what we'll also do here is we're going to go into Command Prompt, and we're going to do a host name. We can see the host name. And we're going to do a GP result, capital Z. And what we're specifically going to look for here is we're going to make sure that we're on the right domain. So here we are, domain type, Windows 2000. There's the domain controller itself, YTD DC001 YTD.local. And here's the applied group policy objects, Hardend UNC. And if we scroll down here, we'll actually see, yep, here we go. Hardend UNC, administrative template, group policy objects. And this is how you can configure your Windows 2000 domain to apply the latest group policy configurations to your Windows 10 and Windows 11 clients. Now, this doesn't fix the SMB issue because, again, you're going to need SMB1 to communicate to the domain controller. And I would still suggest what you do is you put into play a 2008 domain controller and add it to your 2000 so you can control this from the 2008 domain controller. But if that's not an option, you don't have the funds, you don't have the finances, and you still have to manage this, run it from your Windows 10 machine. Just keep in mind, once you do that, that Windows 10 machine becomes your central store. So you need to control everything from that Windows 10 machine. The Windows 2000 machine at that point should only be there for the sake of running authentication and the back end. Everything should be configured from that RSAT Tools Windows 10 ADMX extension controller. Like and subscribe for more videos, and thanks for hanging around, guys.